In 1955, I was born a red diaper baby into a family of card-carrying, committed, fierce, active communists. And it was just the water that I swam in. My grandpa had been a Bolshevik. My grandma had beat up a police officer with an umbrella when she was protesting on behalf of the garment workers in New York. My dad was organizing the union, the Teamsters, in California, and was one of the organizers of the first integrated housing, the first integrated housing settlement for Ford Auto workers in the United States. And my mom was a very, very, very fierce feminist architect back in those days. And I didn't think much about it. In fact, communism to me was something wonderful and tender, and I felt proud of my parents. And in fact, some of my tenderest moments came with my mom, because she wasn't around very much, but she would sing lullabies to me. And of course, she sang Union songs. And the song that she would sing was, there once was a Union maid who never was afraid of goons and ginks and company things. And I thought the song was for me. I thought I was the Union maid. So when I was about 5, my mom took me and my sister outside of the country for a number of years, and we came back in 1967 to Los Angeles, and I was in 7th grade, wanting desperately to fit in. I was an expat, and so I started wearing those fishnet stockings, 1967, white eyeliner, and I had a huge crush on Adam Jones, who was the coolest guy in 7th grade. He was so cool. He was hot. He was really popular. And during this time, 1968 rolled around, and the Cold War was heating up considerably. The Soviet Union had invaded Czechoslovakia. We were getting deeper and deeper into the Vietnamese War, Vietnam War. The Tet Offensive had taken place. More and more and more Americans were dying, and Vietnamese were dying. And one day, my social studies teacher decided that it would be a great idea to discuss the Vietnam War in class. And so the consensus really fast by the class was, it's great that we're in Vietnam, and the commies are bad, and we should kill them. So in a moment of sheer, not bravery, but wanting to be loyal to my parents, I said, well, because I thought it was a dialogue, my parents are communists. And there was this shocked silence. And then Adam Jones, the love of my life, shouted out, "Your mommy is a commie!" I was mortified. The rest of the class burst into laughter, and that afternoon I slunk home, really grappling with how do I make my way through these two competing ideas. And at dinner, my mom said to me, so what did you learn in school today? And I sat there and in my most pre-lawyerly voice, very convincing, I said, we need to kill all the commies. And that was the second shocked silence that I faced that day. And needless to say, my mom and I didn't actually talk about politics for about 30 years. After that, I became a feminist and a tree-hugging environmental lawyer, and really didn't think about communism until 2001, when I called my mom to say, guess what? We are bringing a red diaper baby into the family. And because we were going to be adopting a little girl from China. And I thought about it next. When we were in China, in the heat of the summer, And I was sitting in a little hotel with a little tiny pink girl in my arms, and she was howling with fear. She was terrified, and I was terrified because now I was a mom. And so I began to sing to her, and I sang, "There once was a Union man who never was afraid of goons and gings and company finks and deputy sheriffs who made the raid. Oh, you can't scare me, I'm sick of the Union." And she drifted off to sleep, and she did for many years after that, till she totally kicked me out of her room as a teenager. And what I have come to realize after all these years, whether it is, well, I have realized that the fomenters of revolution, the ones on the front line, are the ones who really care, who care about their families and who care about what happens in the state of the world. And whatever happens after the revolution, you know, power corrupts. We know that. But in France, in Iran, in China, in Russia, I know that those revolutionaries were doing the right thing. And I want to say to Adam Jones, wherever you are, yeah, my mommy's a commie, and so's my dad, and Bubba and Zeta, and I am proud to be a red diaper baby.
Yeah, I'll tell you that, you drink half a case of Gatorade, you get heartburn very badly. Especially when you're sitting there listening to James tell you how you should live your life, which is a story for another time. Yeah, I came here for a visit for 2 weeks. I thought I was coming for 2 weeks. I was living in New York City, and I thought I'd come up here for I thought I'd come up here for a couple of weeks to sort myself out. That was 30 years ago, so I guess I sorted myself out. But before that all happened, I grew up in a part of England which is actually the birthplace of the Industrial Revolution, the Pennine Mountains in the north, between the cities of Manchester on the left, Sheffield on the right, Leeds on the north, Birmingham on the south. So it's a sort of a rural area surrounded by what were throughout the Industrial Revolution the hellholes of the world, you know, the workshops of the world, kind of China of its time. And where I lived was mills, a lot of mills, kind of like this, I suppose. The difference being that growing up there in the 60s and 70s, as I did, it rained a lot. You know, it's true what they say, it rains a lot, everything's green, brown, covered in mud. Or in the case of my village that I grew up in, working class village, everything was covered in cow shit because the farms were each end of the village. And they bring the cows through the village every day to milk them in the morning, in the evening. And they shit all over the streets. So growing up, that was a normal thing. You know, we'd just take that for granted that everywhere was covered in cow shit and smelled that way. I moved to Liverpool, which I found out doesn't smell of cow shit, but it has a lot of other funny smells going on. No, the thing is, about growing up at that time in England, it was pretty rugged. 60s, the swinging London thing didn't really reach us. I think the swinging London thing only happened in about a half square mile of London anyway. And certainly 160 miles north, we didn't know anything about swinging London. But we did get American TV shows. We got The Lone Ranger, we got Champion the Wonderful, we got The Monkees. And I had this bizarre kind of influence on my mind as I was a happy little boy, but I was also miserable and I felt like I wanted more. I felt like there was going to be more than cow shit on the streets and rain every day and you know, that kind of stuff. And so I'd watch these TV shows and I'd be like, I'd get a very bizarre picture of America, which was sort of based upon gingham curtains in episodes of The Lone Ranger or Champion of the Wonderful, gingham tablecloths. Everything was gingham, black and white gingham as it was in those days on the telly. But something about the gingham really captured my attention. It looked clean and neat. And everything where I grew up seemed messy and dirty and cold and wet. And I thought, that's where I'm going to go. I've got to go to America. America is the answer to all my problems. I get away from the cow shit, I get away from the rain, I get away from the general depression. Because by the time we reached the 70s, England was in a major depression. Our lights used to go out at 9 o'clock at night because there wasn't enough energy to fuel towns. So they had the miners' strike, they had the garbage workers' strike, they had every kind of strike you can imagine, transport strikes. England was not looking that great. By the time I got to Liverpool, all those strikes were in full swing, and again I'm thinking, I gotta get out of here. Of course, at this point, I've learned a lot more about America. I've seen movies, Taxi Driver, Deliverance, and I've also discovered Andy Warhol and everything about New York City and Lou Reed. And so my idea of America was becoming like this giant fuzzball stuff stuck to it, starting with the Lone Ranger, ending with Andy Warhol. And I didn't give it much thought, except I'd stayed true to my course. I've got to go to America. I should also add that this was topped up on a regular basis by my mum, who had dated GIs during the Second World War, who told her all kinds of wild stories about taking her to Hollywood because she was a singer in the band. I think most of these guys, from what I gleaned later, were probably from Kansas or somewhere, but they told they were from Hollywood. Anyway, she had all kinds of romantic notions, so add that all together. I'm 19, I'm front of art school, that's where I was at Liverpool Art School. I got a full ride, as you would call it in America, full ride scholarship. What it really meant in England at that time was, this kid's bloody useless, let's send him to art school instead of putting him on the dole. So I got a free ride to art school. After about a year, I'm bored with it, and I said to my dad, Dad, I think I'm going to quit art school. He goes, oh, what the hell are you going to bloody do? I said, well, a mate of mine's been talking about working on these factory ships in the North Sea, the Norwegian factory ships, and you can earn loads of money. And you go out to sea for like 3 months, process the fish, come back, and you get all this money. He goes, oh, you think you like that? I said, I don't know, I haven't really thought about it, but loads of money. He goes, well, last time I checked, you don't speak bloody Norwegian, so I think you'll get on a bloody ship full of Norwegians for 3 months out at sea in the winter. He put me off the idea. He said, why don't you take a year off? I took a year off. I worked in the mine that he had worked in, lead mines around where I grew up. I didn't go down the mine, I was working on the surface, but made loads of money, saved it all, came to America, bought a ticket to New York City. I remember my mum and dad taking to Manchester Airport, and I'm getting more and more nervous because the night before we'd been sitting watching Kojak together. And as I drove to Manchester, I'm thinking, why doesn't someone stop me? Why don't they say you shouldn't go? You're too young. I was 19. I'm thinking, why don't you say you shouldn't go? I don't mind. I wasted money on the ticket. Maybe I shouldn't go. Maybe I shouldn't. I'm watching that Kojak episode last night, the Muggins. I remember a friend of mine in the pub said to me, "You going to America?" I said, "Yes." It's a long way to go just to get mugged into it. And I kind of have been ignoring all these signs. So I get to the airport, check in, I'm walking, to the exit part, and I'm thinking, why don't these guys in uniform say, now lad, turn around while you've still got a chance, go back home with your mum and dad. New York City's no place for you. But they didn't, so I flew to New York City. Well, we stopped in Scotland on the way. But I remember we got to New York City, and all of a sudden it was stacking, because this was January, by the way. I was an idiot. Come to New York City, January of 1977, biggest storm they'd had in God knows how long. We're stacking over New York City, and the captain's voice is saying, "Mumbling over it, bro. We don't have to detour through Montreal." Montreal? Screw that. That's bloody French. I don't want to go to bloody... I was getting really pissed off. I've saved all this money, worked in that shitty job, and now I'm going to end up in bloody Canada, the least romantic of all the countries of the Americans. Why the hell would I want to go there? Anyway, we landed. I remember looking out the window as we were coming down as the snow cleared, seeing these big American cars on the Long Island Expressway. And it suddenly dawned on me that probably every one of those cars, the people in them are carrying guns, and they're probably going to shoot me, one of them. The whole sort of, taxi driver and, let's not even talk about Deliverance, was coming back into the head and thinking, maybe we should have gone to Canada after all, I don't know. Anyway, cut a long story short, I arrived in New York City, it all worked out pretty well. There's a lot more to it, it's in the book, you have to buy the book. But I will say this, 10 years ago, my little brother said to me, I was back in England, he said, "Hey kid, I've got to tell you something, I've got to show you something." What it was he's a bit of a brainiac, and he'd done a family history, and he discovered that this guy called Isaac Sheldon, one of the founders of Northampton, is my great-great-great-great-great-great-granddad, came here in 1640. And I live about 50 yards from Sheldon Field. Go figure.
Okay, so I'm carrying that away. And I too was a different diaper baby. And my early childhood in the Bronx and later culture shock moving to the suburbs of Connecticut was about secrets and lies. One secret was I could not tell anyone that my parents were communists in the 30s. But later on, they became disillusioned. My mom became a Democrat, and my dad became an avid Republican. Imagine the talks we had as a teenager as I became an activist, but that's another story. I'm telling you today about secrets and lies and 3 lies a day. So the other secret I had to keep was that my dad was an osteopath. If anyone asked, I had to say he was a doctor, which he was. And that was his shame, but I had to carry that then. And the other secret that I had to keep was that I lived at my grandparents' house because my dad, when I was 5, ready to go to kindergarten, researched the school in our neighborhood in the South Bronx and declared that it was a rough school and children were beating up the teachers. I don't know how kindergartners beat up teachers, but that was the story. So I was transferred to PS 75 in my grandmother's district, and every day I'd walk home and have lunch at her house. How can a 5 or 6-year-old walk home in the big city? We don't do that now, do we? But we all felt perfectly safe because in New York, every neighborhood is a village, and everybody knows everybody. And there are people in New York City and the different boroughs who never leave their neighborhoods because everything they need is in that neighborhood. Subways, supermarkets, laundromats, delis with egg creams and corned beef sandwiches and Dr. Brown's cream sodas. Anybody know these things? Okay. So, when I was 7, every day my dad, who was a doctor, would drive me to school and make sure that I was safe, got out into the very cemented, gray playground where my little friends would meet me. And one day when I was 7, we were skipping and laughing and going into school, and they started talking about God. And I didn't know what they were talking about, because I never heard about God. And so I asked them, what did they say? They said, oh, God is everywhere. God, and God was a he. God can grant you any wish. It's called praying. You pray to God for anything you want, and you get it. And so, and God is everywhere. So I looked around. I didn't see God. I looked here, there, around. And they started giggling and laughing. And they said, no, God's invisible, but everywhere. So we're going into school, and I'm thinking about this, and it's very intriguing to me. Now, my formal name is Carolyn, and so my report cards would always have a note from the teacher every year saying, Carolyn has a vivid imagination. Okay, so what does that mean? I like to tell stories. I like to embellish things. I like to be creative. But that really wasn't accepted in the 1940s in New York City, at least in our circles. And so, thinking about it when I got home that night, I thought, well, I'll pray. They said you can pray to God. So I prayed to God, and I asked God to grant me the ability to tell 3 lies a day. Okay? I wouldn't get punished. By telling a lie, I wasn't lying. You know how children's imaginations can get. And I had a vivid imagination. So I started. Maybe I would explore my mother's dresser drawers to see the mysteries that lay within. Maybe I'd grab some chocolate from the Barton's chocolate box because I was only allowed like 1 chocolate when they passed the box around. My mother would say to me, did you have chocolate? No. Is that true? Yes. So I was caught pretty easily, but I was still determined to do my 3 lies a day. I did it for maybe 2 days. But every time I got caught, because to this day I'm a terrible liar, but I didn't know that then. I found out. But then one day, a little girl from my class was absent many, many days. And everybody was concerned about her. So the teacher one day looked at all of us and said, has anyone seen Maria? And everybody shook their heads no. And when it felt like she was looking right at me, I said, yes, I saw her. And she told me she was never going back to school, she hated school. Now, Maria and her family lived kitty corner across the street on Hoe Avenue from my grandparents. And they sent a truant officer and some other officials to her house. Oy vey. What happened next was I'm called into school and I see my mother's with me, maybe my dad, I can't remember, and all these very official looking people. I was a little kid, so these tall people with big uniforms and serious faces and balding heads and hair. And they say to me, we went to see Maria and she's very sick, seriously sick. I shriveled and shrank right there. I was filled with emotions I had never felt before. I was so scared and I felt so guilty and I was so sorry. But here were all these officials and I thought, I had never been in trouble. I was a well-behaved kid because I was so monitored all the time. I think that's why I wanted my 3 lives, just to have some freedom. And, but this lie, this was the big lie. This was a terrible lie. And what happened next was a sense of my parents, though they were very embarrassed and angry, they still accepted me. And they understood my vivid imagination. They knew that I wasn't someone who normally did that. And so the theme of the story slam today is roots. And I vowed I wouldn't lie anymore, and there sprouted the roots of my integrity, my lifelong integrity, I hope. So that was that. And now I'm a little older, I'm 9 and a half, we moved to the suburbs of New Haven. Culture shock, like you would believe. Culture shock. But that's another story. Thank you.
Well, I knew what a grandma was supposed to look like. She's supposed to be short and round and have white hair and look very, very sweet, something like a donut that's been rolled in confectionery sugar. But my grandma was tall and thin and bony and proud. And when you sat on her lap, you felt like you were sitting on a pile of wood. And you only sat in her lap if it was crowded in the back seat of the car. She wasn't grabbing you to sit on her lap otherwise. My brother and I were very proud of her. When we would walk down the street with her, we would notice men huck and spit. And we would notice Grandma could huck and spit further than anyone of them. And I would try as hard as I could to emulate her, and it would dribble down my chin. But every single Friday, my father would pick Grandma up because it was Shabbos, and she came for our Shabbos dinner. And before dinner, she would always play cards with us, and Grandma was really like a card shark. She would shuffle the cards, she would make beautiful arcs, and then she would deal, and it would be so fast, and my hands like this, I would watch in amazement, how did she do it? And then I would put my cards in my hand, and always invariably 1 or 2 would show and fall, and I'd put them back in, and we would play round after round after round. And Grandma would always win, and Michael would come in second, and I would lose. I would lose and lose and lose. And she wasn't anything like the sweet Grandma rolled in confectionery sugar. She never lost once. So I went into the kitchen that day because I couldn't stop crying, and my father was reading the paper. And when he was reading the paper, you didn't say anything. But I stood there. And finally he noticed me and he said, "Sally, what do you want?" And I said, "Grandma's so mean, I really hate her. She never will let a little girl win. She never will win. Let me win at cards." And he said, "Sally, sit down. Have I ever told you about your grandmother and the Schwarze cholera?" Well, I was intrigued. When my father told a story,
I was excited. He was a wonderful storyteller. So I sat down and he said, the Schwarze Cholera means the Black Plague. And when your grandma was a little girl, she was one of many children. There were 10 in her family, and she was the baby. And the Black Plague came to Vladivostok, Russia, in the fall. And all her brothers and sisters died except for her. And her mother died. There was no one left but her father and her, your great-grandfather. And little Sarah began to shrivel and shuckle, which means shake. And she developed a palsy, and she shook, and she couldn't eat. And your great-grandfather said, God, am I to lose them all? And then the snows came, and it was very, very cold. Vladivostok doesn't even have light in the winter. Maybe 2 hours a day the sun will shine. And he didn't know what to do. So he wrapped her up in blankets, and he put her in the drushka, which was a horse-drawn sleigh, and they went out. It was very, very dangerous to go out in the sleigh in the winter, because if more snow came, your sleigh could be snowed in. And if it couldn't move, the wolves would come to eat the horses. And then the people inside, even if the doors were closely closed, would freeze to death and not be found to the spring. But he had to save his daughter. So he went out, and she remembered, he said, beginning to smell a strange smell, which was smoky and sweet. And she was coughing, and he didn't know where he was taking her. And then he could see there were logs piled, one on top of the other. In the other direction were bodies frozen from the plague. And then more logs and more bodies. And kerosene had been put on them. And they were flaring up into the dark sky. And she could feel the heat, and she became even more afraid. And then he took her out of the drushka with it, and he went over to the rabbi. And he said, Rabbi, with his long payas, I cannot help my daughter. She will not stop shuckling. She will not stop shake. What shall we do? And the rabbi looked, and he pulled out of his pocket a small leather pouch with a string. And he took it, and he picked up some ashes, and he put it in, and he tightened it. And he put it around little Sorola's neck, and he said, in this bag is your mother's ashes. If you shuckle, if you shake, she will not rest in heaven. And Grandma pulled herself together with all her might, because she wanted her mother to rest and be at peace. And she had her with her. And with that, she stopped shuckling. Well, your grandmother lived through the pogroms. She lived through the German detention camp. She came and lived in America in one room using a bathtub as her refrigerator. She didn't lose to anything, so she's certainly not going to lose to a little girl like you. Go play some cats.
Hi, everybody. So, when I was growing up, I was one of those kids that had many embarrassing things happen to me, and I suppose all kids have that, but I seem to remember all of these embarrassing moments to very, very detailed structure. And at the root of every one of these embarrassing moments is my father reassuring me. And his reassurance came in the form of, for example, Dad, I can't believe I just fell down the stairs at the end of my concert. I may have broken my clarinet, but I'm very embarrassed. And my dad would reply, well, Tammy, you could have cancer right now like your Uncle Chuck. He has a 20-pound tumor in his stomach, so just be glad you're not him. And this is the kind of trial by fire I had throughout my entire childhood with my dad. So I would have other embarrassing moments. So for example, when I was in marching band at the Grand National Championships and the last beat of the show happened, my cymbal broke and went flying across the the field, or another time when I was a senior in high school and going for my second year on varsity softball, and they cut me from the team, taking my little sister in my place. Every one of these embarrassing moments, my dad had an answer that would really put it into perspective that it wasn't so bad. So the story I'm going to tell you today is about one such moment that happened to me when I was a little older. And this takes place at a Hootie and the Blowfish concert, which back in the day was quite the concert. And it happened at this place called SPAC, which is Saratoga Performing Arts Center. Now this is an art center where a lot of the concerts, you could sit on the lawn, and it was an outside concert venue. So I went to this concert, and if you've ever been to a music concert, the worst part of the concert for a woman is having to wait on the bathroom line, because it takes so long, and you've paid money to hear these songs and listen to it and see it. So, sure enough, about halfway through the concert, I decided I need to use the bathroom. I go back to the bathrooms, and they're under construction. And so instead of a bathroom experience, there were about 30 porta potties in a line, and I had to wait on this line. And the line was slow, it was about 30 minutes long, and I'm trying to listen to the concert and getting more and more aggravated. Finally get up to the front of the line. And porta potty lines are different than any other bathroom line. I know in the women's room, when you walk in, you just have to stand in line at the door, and the next stall that opens, you get to take it. But in a porta potty line, for some reason, there's about a 20-foot space between the porta potties and the people waiting online for the porta potties. And rather than one long group and whichever next porta potty comes along, you get to pick. No, you have to stand online and kind of a game of, I guess this is a good line, and just wait for the porta potty door, to open, and you take your turn. So here I am at the end of this line. Finally, I'm the next person in, and I'm really wanting to get back to the concert. And this is before cell phones, so I couldn't exactly tell my group I'm still online or anything like that. I didn't know anyone online with me. And I get into the porta potty. Finally, I turn around, I go to close and lock the door, and I've got the porta potty with no lock. Now, I know the women in this room have been in that situation. We've all been in this situation before. You have a few options. You can ask a friend to help you and hold the door. You can go to another line, or you can just do the one-handed business of holding the door open and trying to move on. So, not knowing anyone, I decided that was what I was going to do. Things were going fine. Had my toilet paper in one hand, had my door held in the other hand. I'm kind of squatting down, trying to make this as quick as possible. And all of a sudden, I feel a tug on that door. And that's like the worst thing in the world that you can feel in the middle of going to the bathroom. So I quickly tugged it back. The person on the other side of the door took that as their opportunity to tug a bit harder. So all of a sudden, I just felt that door open hard and open fast, and I was not going to let go. So I'm like, you gotta be kidding me. And I really think I could have held on to that door, and I did hold on to that door, but what I did not factor in was all the sludge and urine and everything that created a very slick surface for me to come flying out of that. And the moment I came out of that door, I just remember looking up, and very similar to this, with an audience back, that's what it was like. And I just remember coming out, and every person in that audience went, and very clearly, that was a really bad moment. And I remember the man who had opened the door on me looked at me in that moment and said, I'm so sorry. And that would have been okay, except he then pushed me back in to slam the door back on me, and I fell down again. So now I'm in this porta potty, and I've got all of this sludge all over me. I'm on the floor of the porta potty, and the worst is yet to come, because I knew I had to see that audience another time, as yes, I'm that person who came out of the porta potty. And this is not a dignified story, I understand that, but I came out of that porta potty the second time, and the audience all kind of had that awkward look. I gave it back to them, gave a little wave, and went back to my concert. And I thought, well, I wonder what my dad would have to say about this one. So I called my dad up, and I'm like, so Dad, guess what happened now? And my dad listened to the story, and he said, Tam, yeah, I know. He goes, think of it this way, none of them will ever have as bad of an experience as you. And you are the person who has provided them with that moment of, well, at least it's not as bad as what she just Thank you.
So I'm going to start my story with a confession. I am a New York Giants fan. I hope that does not automatically preclude some of you from consideration for the story slam. My story is about how rooting has affected my life. The worst fist fight I ever saw happened in Veterans Stadium in 1990 between two guys who were rooting really hard for their team. The Giants were playing the Eagles on Monday Night Football. The stadium was full, and I don't know if you know anything about the Giants and the Eagles, but they are very fierce rivals. And Veterans Stadium, and the fans who go to Veterans Stadium for Eagles game, they are not known as being, shall we say, very welcoming. These are the fans who once famously threw snowballs at Santa Claus during a halftime show, and that is true. They also had, in the lower level of Veterans Stadium at the time, a jail and a courtroom set up because so many people were getting into fights or drunken altercations, whatever it was, they needed a way to adjudicate people quickly. Which is to say that fights at Veterans Stadium were not that unusual. So it's halftime of the game, and I'm on line to the bathroom. And again, I think that's your theme for your next slam is people really don't like bathrooms. So the bathroom was crowded, and the line kind of came out into the hallway. So when people have to go by the hallway, they have to get past people who are waiting to go to the bathroom, which is a little bit odd. So not surprisingly, two guys kind of bump into each other, and they don't really like the fact that that happened. So one guy is there wearing a Giants t-shirt, and the other guy says to him, "The Giants suck." So the guy takes off the offending Giants t-shirt for some reason, to reveal, of all things, a Dolphins t-shirt underneath it. So in the coup de grace, his opponent says, "The Dolphins suck too." And they start going at it. Now, I don't condone violence, but I realized pretty quickly that I kind of wanted these guys to start fighting, because the more people who left the bathroom line to go watch them fight, the quicker I'm going to get to the front of the line. And it worked. We were all kind of like in 8th grade, we're all shouting, "Fight, fight, fight," and then people are kind of going to watch them when I go into the bathroom. Just as I'm going into the bathroom, one guy had the other guy by the ear. He was banging his head on the wall. That kind of crystallized for me what I had learned growing up about fans and rooting. I grew up in New Jersey, and I was lucky enough to have a friend whose father had season tickets to the Giants. So I used to go to New York Giants games all the time. And the thing about Giants games and Giants fans is at those times, the Giants were not winning a lot. Those were lean times, so I saw them lose a lot. And when I would leave the stadium, I would have this odd feeling of almost elation. Not because they lost or anything, but because there were 80,000 people who were more upset than I was. It wasn't that I wasn't upset, it's just that they showed it more. And now, something about Giants fans, I talked about Eagles fans, something you need to know about Giants fans. We all talk about animals sometimes, you watch those documentaries and they talk about animals, how sometimes they eat their young. That's kind of what Giants fans can be like. I once saw one group of Giants fans over here throwing snowballs at another group of Giants fans over here because they were upset about how they weren't rooting properly. This was during a playoff game that the Giants won. And they also had at the stadium these spiral walkways. And a regular halftime entertainment was people would go to the spiral walkways and they would throw change or dollar bills down in the middle. And then when people would be walking by at the bottom and they'd see the money, they'd go out there to pick it up. And then they get pelted from above. Hot dogs, pretzels, popcorn, beer. As I say, I learned pretty quickly when I was young that there's a difference between being a fan and being someone who roots too hard for your team. Because as it occurred to me, rooting for a team is really kind of stupid, because it really makes it all about you. We do it because we want to feel like we have some control over what the outcome is going to be, but we really don't. Then when our team loses, a fan is going to be upset, sure, but someone who's a bad fan who roots really hard, they're going to do something stupid like get angry, get into a fight, or set a car on fire, or all three. So as I grew up, I felt like I had my fandom under control. And then three things happened to me. One, I moved to New England. two sons who, much to my dismay, became big fans of two teams who I despise and whom I won't name. And the third thing that happened was the New York Giants played one of those teams in the Super Bowl. So this was a classic Super Bowl game. It was a fantastic game. The Giants won an improbable victory. I didn't expect them to win, but during the game I rooted, and I rooted shamelessly. I rooted so hard that I literally ripped the seat of my pants open. But I didn't change my pants because I figured it was some kind of a luck thing, so I wanted. But the real low point came when Tom Brady got tackled, and I celebrated a little bit too much. And I looked over at my son, my younger son, who was 5 years old at the time, and he had tears in his eyes. And I realized he's looking at his sports hero on TV on the turf, and he's looking at what I hope is his real life hero, who's celebrating the fact that his sports hero is on the turf. And after a while, he couldn't take it anymore. He left to go somewhere up in his room. Then a couple years later, the Giants played the Patriots again in the Super Bowl. And I still had those pants, and I put them on. And then I find out that both of my sons had made their own arrangements with my neighbor to go watch with me. They didn't want to watch with me. And what is it, I was wondering, what is it that makes us get so insane about supporting the team? And I think it's something deep within us. And maybe that's where the term rooting comes from, because it's like the root of our being that makes us do this. But I now have rules for myself. And I won't wear team apparel. And I won't paint my face. And I won't rub it in when my team does well. And I also got rid of the pants. I actually let my son do that. I let him throw them away. Because I realized that it's not whether your team wins or loses. It's who you want to be and who you want to be with when the game is over. Thank you very much.
So my name actually is Irini Kolona. Irini Kolona. I'm Greek. My grandparents were all born in the same village in the same island. It's Chios, and Chios has been in the news lately. Chios is one of the two islands that the Syrian refugees are coming into. And after all of these years, this still makes me proud. I'm from Chios. Now, this is April, beginning of April. Every March I tell a lie. And the lie is, one of my Greek relatives calls and says, Irini, are you coming to the Carthaginian dance? Now, Kalamila is the capital of Chios. And every March, since I can remember, and it's a lot of remembering, the Carthaginian dance, all of the Carthaginians, not from the other villages on the island, all of the Carthaginians who live in New York or in its environs come together. Now, when I was a little girl, 400 people, I understand there are thousands. Irini, are you coming to the Carthaginian dance? And every year I say, oops, I have something to do. Oops, I'll fall and break my leg that day. I never go. But here's how it happened. And this is a story of assimilation. When I was really little, when I lived in New York, my grandmother lived in Astoria. All of the signs were Greek. You know, the storefronts were Greek, the movies were Greek, the newspapers were Greek. And you shopped like you do in Greek. You didn't go to big supermarkets. You went to the Greek butcher, you went to the Greek greengrocer, you went to the Greek bakery, and every day you shopped. You did that kind of shopping. And then my father decided to move to Massachusetts. I had two yayas, two grandmothers. My mother's grandmother, my mother's grandmother, Little Yaya, let's call her. Little Yaya was sophisticated. Little Yaya sewed furs in the garment district. She sewed the lining in the furs, and she was a shop steward. She could actually speak some English. She rode the subway by herself. She was a pretty independent woman. My other yaya never spoke any English, professed never to understand any English, and was ultra protective, and that's the one I'm named after. Her name is Irini, also. By the way, there are like 4 Irinis. So that grandmother, when we moved to Massachusetts, came with us at the beginning, and she would flutter around me, you know, because there was dirt outside this house. They moved to this little freestanding house, the kind of place when you're a little kid who's grown up in apartment buildings, you know, it's just shocking. I ran in the house and I jumped on the floor because for the first time in my life, I was around 4, heading for 5, there was no one downstairs, and I was thrilling. So, one day, my mother and father, I don't know where they were, but Yaya got me ready to go outside and play, because we could see these kids playing right over there in dirt. You know, and that just wasn't something I saw very often, in dirt. So, she very carefully ironed my underpants. She ironed my t-shirt. She ironed my starched white pinafore. She tied this bow just right, just perfectly in back. And they all had hands like this, like I have, very arthritic hands. And so every gesture was very deliberate and careful. And the tying of the bow was very deliberate and careful and so perfect. I was so excited. Now, these kids were wearing clothes I had never seen. They were wearing jeans and flannel shirts. I had never seen that. So, Yaya opened the door, I walked out, and I went over, and I said, Kalimera. And they looked at me, and this little Greek voice said, can I play in Greek? And they looked at me, and they picked up stones, and they picked up dirt, and they threw it at me. Now my grandmother's watching this. I can't imagine how it must have broken her heart. I'm a grandmother now, you know, and I'm a fierce grandmother. I would have gone out and got those kids, but not that grandmother. She was fierce in her home, but not out there. So I came in, I had dirt on this white pinafore, my bow was crooked, I had dirt in my hair, they had thrown some stones at me. And that night, this was absolutely what my grandmother needed to hear to tell my father, you're moving back to New York, you're moving back to Brooklyn. So she told him, and his response was, you'll never speak Greek again. You will never speak Greek again to me. And every time I spoke Greek, it was all hell to pay. I learned English really fast. So, I want to fast forward to when I'm like, about 9 or 10, and you know, one of the unfortunate things that happens to the women in my family as we age, the melatonin leaves our body, but I have really dark eyes. I still have black eyebrows, and I have really black hair, and I was really dark-skinned. And so I was like 9 or 10. All I ever wanted to do is have an American Thanksgiving. You know, in school, you make those turkeys, you cut them out, and they're like this, and the pilgrims wear hats, and, you know, what am I know? This all looks very exotic to me. So every Thanksgiving, though, we went to Brooklyn, and upstairs in this little kitchen, where all this food poured out, upstairs were the women. So the women who were about their 20s, 30s, 40s, they were in the kitchen. The women who were in their 60s, 70s, and 80s sat at the long dining room table with long sheets of homemade phyllo. You know how thin phyllo is? They'd make it. Okay, Brad. So what would happen is we would have Thanksgiving. There would be lamb, there would be dolmades, there is baklava, there is rice, there's all this wonderful food. And I hated it because it wasn't a turkey. So, my first Thanksgiving, my mother made, first real Thanksgiving, made a turkey. And then the other thing I learned about picking a turkey is you have leftovers, like you have these turkey sandwiches. I learned all this at school, I knew this. So turkey sandwiches. So my mother, by this time, had had a few strokes and was a bit dotty. And we went to go make turkey sandwiches for leftovers. She misplaced the turkey and could not find it anywhere. And that's my first Thanksgiving.
I just sold a house, a family house on Martha's Vineyard that had been in the family since 1932. My great-grandmother built it with her dead husband's life insurance money. But my family had been going to the vineyard since the 1880s. So we had a very strong sense of this was the place that you went in the summer. There were stories of clam bakes on the beaches with all the men back in the 1880s. Stories, lots of stories about the summers on the vineyard. And I've been going there every summer since I was 8 weeks old. But I became the one who was selling the family house on the vineyard. This was very sad for pretty much everybody but me, and my family couldn't understand that. How could you be doing this? I said, well, for the last 20 years, I've been the one having to make sure that things happened, that we could go there, that we rented it because it was very expensive to maintain. And I was getting tired of it, and I said, are any of you willing to take this over? Do any of you have the money to take it over? And the reality was no, because they all had young kids, and it just wasn't going to happen. And none of us spent any more than a week, maybe 2 weeks if you were lucky, for the whole year. But my summers there as a kid, it was that classic idyllic place. You go, and there were lots of kids my own age, and this little neighborhood that the house was in, everybody was either related or knew one another back to the 1880s. Those families had known one another, some had been married, cousins marrying cousins, and that kind of thing, but it was pretty incestuous. But the summers were fabulous because there was at least 15, 20 kids, in a broad range of ages. Most of the houses faced a salt pond where we had little rowboats and little dinghies, sailing dinghies, and there was a private beach and another little crab pond. So there was plenty of places that we were free to go as kids. I mean, now, my grandkids, you don't let them go off to the beach by themselves, or you don't let them go off a boat by themselves. Everybody's really afraid. This was idyllic growing up. But slowly but surely, by the time I was a teenager, it was changing a little bit because nobody stayed for the whole summer. My family, we were one of the few that didn't. We were there for 2 or 3 weeks in the summer, but Dad would drive from on the weekends and then he'd be there for a full week or something like that. But slowly you could see that changing. Nobody could spend the whole summer there. New people were buying houses, new people were building houses. And last summer, after my dad died at 100, he made it to 100 and he loved the vineyard, but he knew that it was time to let the house go too. So we put it on the market in June and everybody gathered to go. This was going to be the last summer that we were going to get to go to the house. It was a very special house. So many memories for everybody. But this was also the first summer that my grandkids were old enough to actually get together, the cousins could get together, meet the neighbors' grandkids. These were people that I've known since I was 1 or 2 years old. And the kids were playing in the yards, and we used to do capture the flag. The kids were playing all these games. They were out on little rowboats in the pond. And I had just, I'm not a very melancholic or sentimental person, which most of my kids would attest to. They get very upset with me. You don't care. You're selling this from underneath us, and can't we do anything about it? And I said, no, we've talked about this, we can't. And, but I must admit, I was very sad for my grandkids more than anything else, that they weren't going to get to experience it. But at the same time, I realized that that world was gone. You know, that wasn't ever going to be the same, and that we all had to let go. Well, I spent all last month, 3 separate trips going through the attic in the house where everybody had been storing things since 1932, including things like kitchen cabinets that were removed. And why would you put an old kitchen cabinet up in the attic? Papers from both my dad and my uncle, and they never threw away a piece of paper. My dad had receipts from every car he ever owned. My uncle had letters. He was a pretty well-known artist, from people who had bought his paintings. And so the place was packed with stuff, including all his wood blocks cuts, the actual wood blocks that he used. 2 dumpsters full, the neighborhood's coming in dumpster diving, and everybody, you're throwing that away. And I said, I don't have any space for any of this stuff, I'm sorry. And I've always been a thrower-outer, but I gotta tell you, it was tough throwing out all this family stuff. And I was glad only one of my sons actually came to kind of help, because the rest couldn't handle it, my brother couldn't handle it. And we closed on that house on the 31st of March, and I thought it was going to feel like this weight lifted off of me. And it did in a way, but at the same time, I had been telling myself all along, it's time to establish new things for the family, new experiences. Give them something that would be like my childhood, remember. But at the same time, I know that's not realistic. It's just a different world. Nobody has the time. The kids are different. What they can do is different. And so I'm sad that my roots won't be repeated by my kids. But again, hopeful that somehow they will have experiences that they can relate to their family and something to give to them.
So the first time I ever met Beth, or ever saw Beth actually, was in the basement of our engineering buildings, in the basement lab, a lab we affectionately called it, because it was in the basement, the root cellar. And this was back in like 1995. And she was with her lab partners doing the lab for that week. And just for ha-has, they decided to wear the maximum amount of personal protective equipment, safety equipment that they could, just for fun. And she was wearing, she's a very, very tiny person. Not tiny, but small and all that. And she was wearing coveralls, like these green coveralls that were huge, like 3 times the size that she needed. So she was rolling up with the arms and the legs in order to make it fit. She was wearing the safety goggles that you wear in high school chemistry, the big rubbery ones, but it was like way too big for her head. And she wore like gigantic welding gloves. They're like everything way too big. And you know, how could you not fall in love with her at that point, right? You know, and you know, the problem was, even though now it's pretty obvious that I'm a suave, sophisticated, and social kind of guy, but the fact that I wasn't. And I couldn't tell her how much I felt. And I just like, you know, followed her around a little bit, tried to get in the same classes as her, and my friends would tell me, Chris, you gotta tell her, you just gotta ask her out. And I was like, tomorrow. And, well, we ended up in the same class one day, and it was a project that we had, you know, a semester-long project we had to do. And I heard that Beth was going to be, she's really interested in wind turbines. So quite naturally, I was very much into wind turbines. And so we ended up on the same project together. Awesome, because it's like every week we'd be working together in the student office on our project, and we so close and all that, and still I couldn't find the courage to talk to her about how I felt. And semester goes on and on and on. I tell everyone else, I just don't tell her, right? Well, one day we're on the phone, I'm at home, and I share an apartment with my mom, and she calls me home to discuss when we're going to meet up that week, next time for the project. And in the middle of nowhere, she asked me, so, do you like me? I hear you like me. So I stopped talking for a second, I stopped breathing for a second, and, you know, this is the mid-90s, I'm on the phone with the cord, it goes all the way back to the phone base, and, you know, I don't need my mom to hear this conversation, so I go and pull the cord and the phone into my bedroom, and for added protection, I bring it into the closet with me, I close that door too. And after a long moment, I say, yeah, and she says, listen, I don't feel that same way, but I don't like you in that way. And I think we should just be friends, and just finish our project while business-like. Now, what I wanted to tell her was, this isn't like, this is love. I love you. But the only thing that I could really muster up was just say, okay. And then Beth asks me, are you in a closet? It sounds like you're in a closet. and I quickly end that conversation and we hang up. And back in my bedroom, I collapse into my bed. I'm heartbroken. Really heartbroken. And this isn't the first time something like this happened. There's been many, many other young women that I've wanted to tell how I feel. I haven't. Doris, Jen, and Effie, on and on. And I said, and as I'm thinking about it, I'm feeling sorry for myself, but then I said, you know what, I'm a man now, I'm 22 years old. It's time for me to stand up for and actually say what I have to say and let myself be heard. So I decided, well, if I can't tell Beth in person, I can't tell her right next door in the office, and I can't tell her on the phone. Darn, I'm gonna write a letter. And so I write this letter. It's a very simple letter. It's like, I basically said, I hear what you said, and I respect that. But you see, this isn't like this is love. And I'm willing to risk our friendship and see where that goes. Very, very simple letter, right? I wrote that out on 8 sheets of paper, double-sided. And I put page numbers in circles on the upper right-hand corner so she didn't get lost. And when I'm done with this, I put my name on it, and I'm looking at this, and I'm so proud of myself that I finally did. And I put my name on it too, right? She's not gonna know who it's from. And the very next morning, as soon as I get to school, I put it into her student mailbox and I go off to classes. It's like 4 hours of morning classes, because it's engineering. And halfway through it, it's like, the only thing I can think about during class is, this letter, what I've done, right? And I keep thinking about it, and I think about this letter, what I've done. Because I'm 22 years old, and I've just written a letter that a junior high school student would write. And I need to get back. We're in a small school. Everyone's going to know about this. I'm going to be embarrassed. So as soon as it's a break, I run to the mailboxes, and the letter's no longer there. And I don't know what to do, and I figured, well, all right, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to pretend like it never happened. And we're going to meet in the office, and I'm just going to work. It's all going to be business, just like she said, business. And nothing's going to happen. We're all going to forget about it. When we get into the office, it's Tuesday, we get into the office. And all these other students are there. And she's not saying anything, I'm certainly not saying anything. We're just working. Right? And then lunchtime happens, and all the other students, they all go out for lunch. And it's just Beth and me in the office together. And I turn to her to say something about the code that I'm writing. And all of a sudden, she just gets up without a word, gets up and walks out. And I get up too, I was like, wait, and she's already passed around the corner on the way out of the office. It's like, oh crap, But then I hear the door to the office close, slam shut, and I hear it lock. And Beth comes back around the corner and goes right up to me, and she kisses me. Now I wish I could tell you this was like a Hollywood movie type of kiss, where it was all romantic and suave and all that. But I was completely off guard there, so my eyes were wide open, and my mouth just went up and down like a fish. But it didn't matter, because I finally was able to tell a woman how I felt. I mean, maybe it was a form of a 16-page letter, but I finally did it. Thank you.
So while they're counting, I've got a story of Brooklyn. Brooklyn? How many from Brooklyn? How many here from Brooklyn? Hey, Brooklyn, yeah! Bronx is good. Bronx, but nothing beats Brooklyn. Brooklyn is where Bernie comes from. That's right. Brooklyn is where Woody Allen comes from. They come from right in my neighborhood. That's right. So my tale is also of Brooklyn. It's about my dad. He was a big man. Big appetite for big food. Yeah, and as long as it was spicy, man's food, and hot, and fatty, and greasy, and salty. Real man's food, kibasi, and salami and pastrami. Unfortunately, my mom had banned all these foods from the house. It was not out of cruelty, she just had this ongoing project to keep Dad alive. Well, the only thing that she left, the only opening that he was looking for his old eating habits, was chopped herring. I don't know how this escaped a ban. Maybe it was because it was seafood. You know. But Sunday was the day for chopping the herring. Mom called me in the kitchen. Bobby, here's $1, and I want you to buy half a dozen bagels. Okay, Mom. And Bobby, here's another $1, and I want you to get a quarter pack of lox. Okay, Mom. Dad comes running into the kitchen. Bobby, wait a second. Here's $1. Don't forget, a pound of pickled herring. Okay, Dad. So, I've got $3 now stuck in my change pocket of my Levi jeans, and I'm charging down to Coney Island Avenue to Izzy's appetizing store. Izzy is standing behind the counter. He's got this big, white, lock-stained apron on. It's whitefish and all sorts of stuff hanging to it. And he's yelling out, "Next! Who's next?" I'm jumping up and down so he can see me behind the counter. Me! I'm next! Oh, what do you want, kid? Can I have a half a dozen bagels? Well, what do you want? Do you want salt? You want plain? You want onion? Onion! All right, 6 onion. What else do you want? Can I have a quarter pound of lox? What do you want? Belly? Or do you want Nova? Belly. Quarter pound to eat belly. What else do you want? And a pound of, come on, kid, open it, say it. A pound of pickled herring. 1 pound of pickled herring. Now I've got all the stuff. Shot there, holding it under my arm like a football, and I go charging home back down the street. I'm jumping over the cracks in the sidewalk, and I'm going zigzagging back and forth like a football player. I run up the stairs in 1171 Ocean Parkway. You can smell that Sunday morning smell of toasting bagels all through the building. Go into the apartment, I put the bag down in the kitchen, I ran into the living room, sat down next to my brother, Johnny. He's watching this 10-inch black and white Motorola TV. Hopalong Cassidy is shooting it out with the bad guys. All right, Bart, give it up. Never. Bang, 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 bang. That's what Hoppy pulls out his gun. I warned you, Bart. Bang! Bart goes, shot it out of my hand. That's right, Bart. That's how good guys shoot. All of a sudden, from the kitchen, I hear my father yelling, "Bobby, Johnny, come here, come on, I need your help." Johnny immediately slides under the sofa. I can't fit. I'm trying to get under there. My father grabs my feet and pulls me back. "Come on, Bobby, give me a hand. Wait, give you a hand." So, I'm standing in the kitchen. My father picks up a knife. He looks like Toscanini leading the orchestra. Up there, Bobby. You see that? Up in the cabinet, I want you to get down Grandma's old chopping wooden chopping bowl and the chopper. Oh, okay, Dad. So I pull over a chair and I start to climb up on the chair, reaching around inside the cabinet. Meanwhile, Dad is starting to slice up the onions. 2 big Bermuda onions. Slicing, and I can hear him sniffing. His nose is starting to run. Sweat's pouring down his forehead. Oh, Bobby, these are beautiful onions. Dad, I got the bowl, Dad. I passed it down to him. And here's the chopper. And down Grandma's big 2-bladed chopper. I come down, stand next to him. Dad takes the herring, the pickled herring, throws it into that big wooden bowl. And he takes the onions that he just chopped up, throws them into the bowl. Oh, the smell, it's good. Oh, tears are running down everyone's faces. Bobby, all right. Put in the vinegar. And he opened up the vinegar and stuck it in front of me. The smell, I'm just out of the bottle. Oh, it's going right down my nose. I can feel it right up to my eyeballs. Come on, Bobby, come on, don't be a sissy, put it in. Oh, come on, that's not enough. Put it in. Oh, for crying out loud, Bobby, come here. This is how you put in vinegar. And he grabbed the bottle out of me, empties the whole bottle into this thing. Close it up. All right. You ready, Bobby? And he starts to chop. And he chops. And he chops, and the sweat's pouring down his face, and his nose is running. His eyeballs have turned completely red. Oh, he's beautiful. Chops, and he chops, and he chops, and he chops, and finally, this call goes through the whole apartment. Breakfast! John and my brother, my mother, come into the room. My father's standing at the head of the table. Right in front of him is a platter with 1/4-pounder lox on it. And there is a bowl full of bagels. And then there is a huge bowl standing right in front of Dad. Shimmers. It looks like it glows. All right, Bobby. Everybody, let's eat. And we all sit down. Well, my mother, my brother, they immediately grab for the 2 pieces of lox. Dad, though, I'm watching him. He picks up this bagel. He slices it into 4 exact slices. Gotta watch the diet, you know what I'm saying? Then picks up one of the slices and he begins to pile on the chopped herring. Digs into it. Puts on another spoon. Now he's starting to breathe heavier and heavier. The sweat is pouring down his face. He picks up a slice of onion, puts it on top, opens his mouth wide. His breath is coming faster and faster. My mother is staring at him. She's afraid he's going to have a heart attack. She stares and opens up wide. And then he finally bites down. Oh! Suddenly, his eyes pop open, his eyeballs roll back in his head, his mouth opens, sweat explodes from his forehead. slice it, and I put on a tiny bit of chopped herring. Just all the way around. I gotta try this. I open my mouth. This is it. And I take a bite. The brine, the vinegar, it hits my throat. The nostrils, the fumes are going up my nostrils. I can't even see. I just run over to the sink. I turn on the faucet. I put my mouth right under it. Nobody notices. My mother, my brother, they're just helping themselves to a piece of lox. Dad, he's slathering up another bagel and we put an onion on top. Well, that was many, many years ago. But things have remained. Because I still love a beautiful, appetizing counter. You know, with lox from not just Nova and Belly, but lox from the Gaspé Peninsula, from Alaska, from around the world. $7 for a quarter pound. But my eye always stops at the chopped herring. And for a moment, I can see my father's face. He's sighing and he's smiling, and the sweat's pouring down his face. And I'm so tempted to try it. But then the brine and the vinegar and the memory come back, and I pass it by. In all these years, you were among the very first people to ever hear this recipe. But I beg you, for your own sake, and for the sake of your children, please forget it.